Hello, and welcome to the Vicars Watch Dibley,
the podcast where real priests talk about pop culture and what we've learnt about faith, life and the church. We watched Dibley, and now we're watching everything else. I'm Kate.
I'm Ross.
And I'm Ruthie, and in this episode we're going to talk about Death in Paradise, which is a murder mystery show if you've never seen it before. We're going to talk about that and how that might relate to the season of Epiphany.
Well, a holy happy hello to you all.
Hello! Happy New Year.
We're in our vicarages, you're listening in, we're ready and raring to talk about Death in Paradise, but first we've got a few notices which I think, Ruthie, you're going to lead us in. What do you have for us today?
Well, Kate, I think we'll start off, actually, by passing to Ross, because Ross, you have a bit of an announcement, don't you, that you can now tell everyone?
I do. Well, I mean, for a short time, my friends, we were 3 vicars who watched Dibley. But alas, I'm not going to be a vicar for much longer, as it will have been announced by now that I am to be the new missioner for young people at Salisbury Cathedral.
Ooh. Now, those are fancy words. What do they actually mean, Ross?
So, in a nutshell, it is a job for working for the cathedral, doing chaplaincy with the cathedral school and the students and families there, and also looking at engagement with young people across the life of the cathedral. And it feels
so
like
exciting.
It's so exciting. I'm gutted to be leaving Reading and my parish here. They've been really good to me, but this feels like a job kind of right up my street, tailor-made for me. And when I saw it, I couldn't not apply. So, yes, I'll be starting there later on in the spring, probably. Well,
Very
yes, it is.
exciting.
I know.
Yeah, dates are in and everything. So
Yeah,
you're officially announced now, so you can tell all of us.
Yes.
Yes. Very exciting. So that's our first revelation.
Yeah.
We have another revelation. I have a story that I want to tell you too, because as soon as it happened to me, I thought, this is perfect for the podcast, and this is one of the most Vicar of Dibley experiences I've had. The only way it could have been worse was if it was in my own parish, okay? So I was going to put it on Instagram and stuff like that, and I thought, I'm not going to do it yet because I want you to hear this live in person.
Okay.
And hear what happened to me yesterday. So, yesterday I went to a spa with my mother-in-law and sister-in-law for my mother-in-law's birthday. It was lovely. I had a very nice time. So it was in like a hotel, and yeah, they had a spa as part of it. And part of the deal is they didn't have robes. Like some spas will give you robes. They gave us towels, so we took our own robes, and my lovely sister-in-law bought them, and we were limited on stock, and so I got one that, shall we say, covered everything, but just. It's how we're going to put this. So it was quite a short hemline, shall we say. And so we're all just having a nice time in the spa, hanging out in our robes and all this stuff. And as part of it, because it was a package deal, we had cream tea as part of it. And then we heard a rumour that it could be upgraded to afternoon tea. So I thought, that sounds great.
Ooh, yeah.
So I volunteered and said, I will go to reception in this hotel and go and see about upgrading afternoon tea. So I waddle along in my little slippers and in my short dressing gown. And when I get to reception, I'm like, oh, that's quite a few people dressed in black. I'm like, oh, there's about 20 people here. Oh, they all look like they've come from a funeral and are going to a wake. And I'm here in my swimming costume and little robe. And I totter off to reception. I'm like, okay, the lady's not here yet, so I'll just wait for a moment. And then she appeared, and then people from the funeral party had some questions to ask, and I was like, oh, please, yes, of course, go ahead. And I'm stood, the door's next to me, and my bottom is almost on display to everyone, but not quite. And I'm not joking. About 50 more mourners came in whilst I was stood at reception.
Goodness.
It was awful. And I dressed him in bright red, and was like, and she was like, "Oh, I'll just go check with chef," because I had to ask about some dietary requirements. So I'm just stood there alone at the desk as people are saying, you know, "Oh, I'm so sorry for your loss." And then I checked with reception and said, I noticed there's a wake here. Where we have the afternoon tea, is it in a separate room to the rest of the mornings? And she said, "Oh, yeah, it's fine. You can come in your robes, don't worry about it." So I toddle off back to the spa, tell my mother-in-law and sister-in-law, "Haha, this was hilarious. Wasn't this embarrassing?" We come back for afternoon tea. Different room is an interesting interpretation. There was like arches between where we were eating and they were. So there's 6 of us in our robes, bright pink robes. They more modestly covered than we are. Having scones while everyone's at this wake. And I thought, if this was in my parish, I would die. Like, can you imagine if it was like, "Oh, is that the vicar over?" Someone else, you know. But I thought, that's just such a great story.
Oh my goodness. Oh my goodness.
Hey, I don't think I've ever seen you constrict into a tiny ball. That's
a second-hand embarrassment.
Yeah.
Oh my goodness.
You just think, "Oh, please don't at the desk say, oh, thank you, Reverend Gibbons. That's very kind of you to inquire about this." So
although, I'm going to offer you a little bit of comfort here.
Okay. It was awful.
When the family were booking the wake, I imagine they knew that there was a spa.
Yes.
The
which
family
was part
might
of
have
the venue.
The rest of the mornings, I'm not sure.
Well, in that case, though, I think it's a family that matter most. So I'm sure the family knew that there was a spa and that there may well be patrons of that spa present at the venue.
I did feel like I just dropped into an episode of Vicar of Dibley.
Yeah, bless
and
you.
mortifying and hilarious all at once.
Oh, bless you.
So, yes. Let's move on from my shame to talk about Death in Paradise. Ross, why did you pick it?
So, I love Death in Paradise. It's been going since something like 2011. And
just to be clear, this is a TV show and not you just enjoy death when it happens. Just general.
Or maybe it's a cocktail. Death in Paradise sounds like a cocktail.
Sounds like a cocktail. Very good one.
Sort of sex on the beach and then Death in Paradise. Big good night out.
Why did you say that whilst I was drinking?
Well, so it is a TV show that has been on BBC since 2011. And the premise of it is that there is a detective from the wet and dreary United Kingdom who is sent to the fictional Caribbean island of Saint Marie to head up a team where they solve the murder mystery of the week kind of vibe. It's a classic Agatha Christie or Midsummer Murders, but it's in the Caribbean. And they always play... they always release each new series in sort of the new year sort of time. I think we've got a new series coming out soon. And part of it is because during that miserable season in the UK when it's in January, February, where everyone's depressed about the weather, we can instead have a lovely snapshot into the sunny life of the Caribbean.
And it's a bit of a meme, isn't it, that the theme tune to Death in Paradise is really upbeat. It's sort of steel drum. They always bring it just after they've had that introduction reveal of the murder.
Yes.
So you have a really gruesome kind of shot and then...
It's so fun. It's high camp. Now, in the team that you have, you got this British detective. It's always a white male ex-sitcom actor or sketch show actor who sort of is the front man of the show.
Fish out of water sort of situation where a rather awkward British male detective inspector is brought over to lead a team of local police.
Thank you, Caitlin. Now, the actors that we've had in the role, we've had Ben Miller, who is probably best known from Armstrong and Miller. He was the first one. He was very uptight by the book, and hated the sun and was
constantly in search of a good cup of tea.
Yes.
Always wearing a full
Aren't we
suit.
Always wearing a full suit, even in the heat of the Caribbean.
Had a very shocking exit in the first episode of season 3. Spoilers.
His exit was a gag, but series 3, episode 1, amazing. He was replaced by Chris Marshall, who is possibly best known as Nick from My Family, or possibly Colin from Love Actually. Yeah. So he then comes in, and I think he's probably, I mean, we were chatting about this at my church, he's probably most people's favourite. He's certainly my favourite, I think, of them. He's also now got a spin-off, which is only, I think, aired for the first time last year, called Beyond Paradise. Anyway, so after him, we then had Ardal O'Hanlon, best known as Father Dougal from Father Ted.
Or from My Hero. I can't remember what character was.
Yes, he was, wasn't he? Yeah.
Or Taskmaster.
Yeah. Recently on Taskmaster.
More recently.
Yeah.
And then the current detective is played by Ralph Little, who we're best known to from Royal Family.
Or 2 pints of lager and a packet of crisps.
Oh, was he in that as well? I've never seen that.
I'm pretty sure, yeah.
Yeah.
No. That used to be something I watched a lot. I don't know why I got away with watching it. Anyway, my favourite, I think, is actually D.I. Jack Mooney, this current one.
Jack Mooney is Ardal O'Hanlon.
Yeah. I liked Humphrey, but I feel like Jack is the most. The others are very, very quirky, and kind of deliberately so, and very. Whereas I quite like that Jack. He's just a very good inspector.
They all bring their own little foibles to them, you know. So, so with Ben Miller, it's by the book. He wants everything done properly. With Chris Marshall, absolute chaos. Can never find a pen or a piece of paper. Lots of very sort of scrappy. With Ardal O'Hannon's character, there's a gentleness and a kindness. There's also sort of kind of like he makes bad dad jokes. That's where a lot of his comedy comes from. He's like your dad or your uncle. And then with Ralph Little at the moment,
he's allergic to everything.
He's allergic to everything. He's a bit of a hypochondriac, and
we'll talk about in a bit. There's a very particular structure to how the detective inspectors investigate and then reveal, and this was started because that's the very first DI we saw, Richard, played by Ben Miller. That was his methodology. And one of my favourite parts of whenever they introduce a new inspector is them being told they have to do this, and they're like, what?
So they have properly set it up like an old Agatha Christie, where at the end, once the detective has solved the mystery, they gather all of the suspects together, and it is revealed who, how, and why the murder was committed. And as I've been binging it all winter. I stopped watching it for a bit for no rhyme or reason. I just took a break, and then I binged it, and then I've been going back and watching all these other episodes, and it's become real good comfort food. But the more I've watched it, the more I've realised it is actually perfect Christmas telly. Not because it's got anything to do with the birth of the baby Jesus, but because the whole season of Christmas is not just about looking to the birth of Jesus, but also about looking ahead to when Christ will come again, that time when we encounter Christ in the fullness of time. A time when truth and justice and true love of God will be known. And it got me thinking in terms of this Death in Paradise, that in each episode you have something straight away that is presented as violent and unjust and not good. But by the end of the episode, justice has been done. That which was hidden in darkness has come to light. And to me, that, as well as cheering us up with sunny shores and blue skies and a Caribbean sea, when we're feeling dark and miserable here in England, actually there is something about the values of God and the values of Christmas in the grand scheme of things, rather than simply in the birth of Jesus, but in that fullness of time as well. So that's kind of what's been going through my head in thinking about Death in Paradise as a Christmas seasonal TV show.
Yeah. So
how does that land with you?
I think that is going to be a really interesting discussion. I think it's a really clever thought, especially because, so unlike procedural crime dramas, for example,
like Silent Witness,
or any of those other, Criminal Minds is one that I watch quite a lot of, which are quite hard-hitting, and they leave you unsettled at the end, even when the suspect is caught, but the suspect isn't always caught, and there's usually those overarching season conflicts and narratives of someone in the background leading up to a greater, some sort of greater conflict. Death in Paradise tends to be one-episode arcs where there is a crime, it's investigated, and justice is sought at the end. And it's all in this setting of, although it's a murder mystery drama, it's quite cosy.
Yes,
and there's a comfort,
it's cozy crime.
It's cozy crime, and there's a comfort that although death is in the title and it is about death is not something to be necessarily that is going to scare us by watching it, which actually is also a very Christmas Eastery message as well, about death isn't something to be scared of. Well, how you die should be, but
I think all of this is making very clear that you two have watched a lot more Death in Paradise than I have. I have. You assigned a special episode for us to Ross.
This is true, yes.
Us to Ross. You assigned a special episode for us to watch Ross. I am familiar with this kind of setup of like murder mystery, because I love Midsummer Murders and like Agatha Christie and all that kind of stuff. I love the kind of getting everyone in the drawing room and telling everyone how it's been. I get that, but I haven't watched that much Death in Paradise, so there's bits of it that I found odd, because I'm unfamiliar with it. So the kind of coziness I found odd, because I've not experienced that with those other kind of things.
We watched episode 8 of season 6, which is called Murder in the Polls, and is about mayoral elections. And our current detective inspector is D.I. Jack Mooney, played by Ardal O'Hanlon.
In this particular one, so like you said, that the kind of characters are standalone, but there's a character. Is her name Catherine?
Yes.
Who's standing for election. Is she there for a longer period of time?
Yes. So she's a recurring character. She's the mother of the previous detective sergeant, Camille. But you wouldn't know that if you're watching this out of context. But she is one of the recurring characters.
She owns a bar, and at the end of most episodes, the team end up having a drink at Catherine's bar. Yeah, and then she decides to run for mayor, and it is around the election of that where this impossible murder takes place.
Right.
And so she is incriminated, but it can't possibly be her.
Yeah, because we know her, and we know that she couldn't possibly be the murderer.
Well, that's what I had as an issue with it, as part of it, because there was one of it where he was saying in the kind of interview stuff of like, oh, of course we don't think it's you, Father, because there's a priest in this as part of it, and of course we don't think it's you, Vicar, and he said that to Catherine as well, and I was like, is this like a technique he uses to get more truth out of people? Because this seems like really dodgy police practice, quite frankly, if he's just going, oh yeah, we know it's not Catherine, of course it's not Catherine, why are we even thinking of Catherine? And I'm like, do your job, mate, that's not how we do it. So okay, that makes more sense. But yeah, you chose this episode because it's got a priest.
There is a vicar in it. Yeah, so there are a couple of different episodes throughout the lifetime of the show, where there are different religious groups represented, And vicars make for good characters they're good archetypes in murder mysteries. And, so there's an episode where there is a convent and you've got a Catholic priest as a part of that. You occasionally do have sort of pastors who feel much more of the sort of more Pentecostal tradition.
There's a faith healer type pastor in one of the episodes.
Yes, because it's set in the Caribbean. There's you step out of Christianity into voodoo once or twice.
Oh, great!
But this particular episode, the vicar feels distinctly Anglican. And
he looks it.
Yeah,
he looks it. Yeah.
Okay, well, we can break that down maybe.
Draw an Anglican vicar, he looks it.
You couldn't look at him and think he doesn't have the slickness of kind of a free church. He doesn't. You couldn't look at him and think he's Catholic because he's wearing a blue shirt when we first meet him,
and he's got a wife,
and he's married, and he has that sort of. There's archetypes of Anglican priests in media, and he fills one of them, which is that sort of ineffectual, naive, and oblivious sort of. Yeah. This is audio, so I can't pull the face of the. There was a sort of.
You can imagine the face. Yeah, and I mean, massive spoiler for the episode, but it turns out his wife did it. Well, conspired to do it with a woman who was his mother-in-law, but he didn't know it was the mother-in-law because she hid the book saying that she was supposed to be an orphan and all this stuff. I just thought, I think you should know your wife a bit better.
Well, but it was a birth secret, so she was legally an orphan because the mother was forced to give her up, and she was in an orphanage. So there was.
But he did the bumbling kind of. Yeah. Oh, I had no idea my wife was capable of all this, and and just join some dots here, mate. Even I worked out pretty soon that as soon as that bloke said about there's a love child somewhere, I was like, well, I bet it's the vicar's wife.
Yeah.
But maybe I've just watched too many of these.
No, I mean, he filled a certain archetype of what the Anglican clergy are represented as.
Perhaps another time we can talk about how much truth there is in these archetypes.
Yeah, and before we go any further, we do just want to say, in discussing particularly the Anglican Communion, so that's a Church of England overseas, and also Death in Paradise, where we have a British inspector who's transported into this setting in the Caribbean. There are issues of colonialism, and there's a wider discussion to be had. We don't think we're the right people to have that discussion, but we will, if we can find some good resources, we'll try and share them with you in the episode description.
Yeah, it was one of the things when I first watched it, I was like, why is the boss white and British? Like, it was one of the things that immediately jarred with me. But as
it's sort of written out in the very first episode about how the island of Seabury was occupied or territorialized and handed between the Netherlands and France and England, and so it's got this mixed match of different cultures and even its bureaucracy as well. The commissioner on the island, he is another recurring character. He's played by Don Warrington.
Yeah.
Another ex-sitcom actor. He was originally in Rising Damp way back in the so that's 70s. Rising Damp.
I think so.
I don't know.
But anyway, and he and Catherine are the two recurring characters from season one. And,
Catherine's French.
Dwayne is recurring.
Yeah. So it was a French territory at some point as well.
Yeah. Dwayne is also a recurring character from season one.
Yeah, he's no longer in it. He occasionally guest stars. He was back.
Played by Danny John Jules, who you'll know from Red Dwarf. So I mean, what I would love to see in future seasons of Death in Paradise is for them, maybe the DI is one of the sergeants who's promoted or comes back, and then actually the sergeant is someone from London. I think because they want to keep that fish out of water narrative. But I think it would be really interesting to see that, because we've had what season are we on now? Like
I think we're going into 13 or something.
13.
Wow.
We've had that many seasons where the inspector has been the fish out of water. I think it would be really interesting to see that inverted. But anyway, we're not going to go much deeper into this, but know that we're aware of the wider conversations around the Church of England across the world, the Anglican Communion, but also Death in Paradise.
Would you consider overseas ministry, or have you had experience of ministry overseas at all?
Yes.
Yes. I think we all have, haven't we?
We all have, I think.
I mean, I know I have.
Kate, do you want to go first? Tell your stories.
I lived in between my undergraduate and my master's. I taught in a kindergarten in Hong Kong, teaching English, which was a church school. And that was Anglican Communion in Hong Kong and Macau. That's the province.
How long were you there for?
That was 1 year. I went back then, did a 1 month placement when I was training at the cathedral there at St John's Cathedral. I crammed a lot into my time when I was in Hong Kong though, so it seems like a lot longer. So I have some experience of the Anglican Church in Hong Kong and Macau. That's the province which was at the time was a diocese, which first ordained a woman in the Church of England, Florence Li Tim Oi, and I enjoyed my time there. I think the only way I could make that work for myself was I made a point of learning Cantonese while I was out there teaching English, because for me, I wanted it to be an exchange. I did, when I was looking at jobs, I did look at a chaplaincy over there and decided it wasn't for me. And I also did a placement when I was training in the diocese in Europe, so I did also consider some jobs out there as well.
Where were you when you were in the diocese in Europe?
So we travelled around a bit. We were based in Belgium, and we visited various churches across Belgium, and we went to the Netherlands as well. We visited some very interesting projects in the red light district in Amsterdam. There is an Anglican religious community there, which was interesting.
Yeah.
Well, there you go. And Ross, you're a mission kid, aren't you?
I was a missionary kid. My dad worked for a charity called Mission Aviation Fellowship. So we were based in Kenya for 3 years when I was a teenager. And we attended sort of an Anglican church in Nairobi. And it was known as Children's Church. And it was a really fun church to be a part of. And my dad's an avionics engineer, so although we were there working for a mission agency, it's not like being a clergy kid like you two are. But yeah, it was fascinating. Really, really great time. I did also visit. You remember our friend Christelle from Cranmer? So she, for a time, was based in the diocese in Europe in south of France. And they invited me out when I was a curate to do some storytelling there to the community. So that was fabulous as well, to sort of have an insight into what that looks like, and to hear about what ministry can look like when your communities your Anglican communities are spread hundreds of miles from each other, really interesting.
Yeah. And what about you, Ruthie?
Yeah, so I lived in Paris for 2 years in France. I was supposed to be 3 months there as an intern, and I ended up staying 2 years as part of a church called St Michael's, which is the diocese in Europe. And yeah, that was fantastic and eye-opening. And you think, like, there's the channel between England and France, and you think that's not that big a cultural difference, but there were massive cultural differences that I had to learn very quickly. And going, right, okay, so it was an English-speaking church, but there was also a French-speaking congregation and a large Tamil community as well there. So there was all this different stuff going on, and yeah, brilliant, absolutely loved it. It shaped so much of who I am now. But deanery chapter, which is where like all the kind of vicars get together, is something that we do here. And, you know, for me, sometimes it's a 30-40 minute drive to chapter, and that feels like a long time. Whereas when it was in France, it was like, yeah, you've got to take a plane to go to chapter for a meeting.
We've touched on this, and we decided we wanted to have a conversation about Epiphany with relation to Death in Paradise. So, Ross, what is Epiphany in terms of it as a word, but then also in the church?
So, Epiphany, as a word, is to do with an unveiling. It relates to revelation. I only laugh because I said unveiling, and Ruthie raised her eyebrows down the camera at me.
We're recording this quite late on a Saturday evening, so we're a little bit more relaxed.
On Epiphany, it is Epiphany. Happy Epiphany, guys. Sorry. So the Epiphany, the word Epiphany means sort of a revealing, an unveiling. It's related to the word revelation as well. And in the church, it is remembered at this season, the 12th night of Christmas. And we hear the story of the Magi who saw the star rise in the east, foretelling the birth of a new king. And so they follow the star, westward leading, and it takes them to where the baby is and where the baby has been born. And they meet with Mary and Joseph and the infant child Jesus, and they give treasure chests of gold, frankincense, and myrrh. Now, I've tried to be... I've tried to tell it as biblically accurate as I can, because there's a lot of myth and legend around the story of the Epiphany. So, for example, we don't know how many magi there were. We often talk about 3 kings or 3 wise men, but actually all we know is that these magi came with 3 gifts of gold, frankincense, and myrrh. And those gifts pertain to the identity of Jesus as the Christ, the Messiah.
Yeah, and in terms of chronology, it's whereas our nativity plays might have the Magi turning up very shortly after the shepherds, it's generally accepted or it's generally considered that the Magi came maybe even a couple of years later, and they discovered the family when they were in hiding in Egypt. So actually, when we talk about them finding the infant Jesus, actually he could have been more of a toddler before his presentation at the temple.
The thinking behind that comes from the fact that this story of the Magi comes from the Gospel according to Saint Matthew, whilst the story of the Nativity is only in the Gospel of Saint Luke. And that when Herod learns that the Magi have betrayed him and not given him the location of this newborn king, he has every child under the age of 2 killed. And so there is a thinking, therefore, that Jesus must have been somewhere under the age of 2 rather than just a newborn or under the age of 1 or whatever.
There's a lot of death in this episode, isn't
there? Death in Paradise, death in Holy Land, and it's also very current.
Let's think about the word epiphany in how we might commonly use it in everyday language and how we might encounter an epiphany in a murder mystery such as in Death in Paradise. I think when we think of epiphany outside of a church, it's a sudden realisation, a moment of sudden realisation. It's your eureka moment of suddenly everything makes sense. We have an epiphany moment in this episode, and I think in nearly every Death in Paradise episode, there's a sudden moment where the detective inspector says something cryptic, because they've suddenly realised everything. Maybe we had a little bit of a flashback to a bit of evidence. They say something cryptic to the detective, to the sergeant, and then they say, gather everyone together, but also you go and find X as well, because I need this piece of evidence. But they don't explain it at that point, and everyone else looks very confused and puzzled.
And it imagine it's very frustrating to have that as a boss, and they just go, oh, "I've got it," and then they don't say anything, and you just be like, "This is so annoying."
Yeah.
You do this
We
every
don't watch-
time, man.
We don't watch Death in Paradise for exemplary policing.
Absolutely not. No, because the police in that flipping episode, they decided to bribe one of the suspects. I'm like, what is this show? Dodgy policing, where he has incriminating photos and says, unless you do this, I'm giving them to the press.
There's also a few instances in other episodes where I do believe that there's bluffing involved in that final gathering together and revealing, where there's maybe a piece of evidence they don't quite have, but they pretend they have, which is
I mean, Poirot does that too.
Yeah, but but Poirot,
That's Poirot.
is not a police constable or detective. He is an independent detective.
Yeah.
But
true.
broadly speaking,
I mean,
broadly speaking,
they have beers at one of the suspects' places. I mean, it's not going to hold up in court, is it?
But anyway, going back to Epiphany, Ross, get us back on track.
I think in that moment of epiphany, in both Death in Paradise and also within the church and the spiritual life, we see a number of things happen. We may have an epiphany in our spiritual life where we suddenly perhaps are overcome with the realization or awe of the love or existence of God. And that realization may draw us or drive us to share the good news which we have come to appreciate and understand at work in our own lives. And that happens within the church as a family, as an institution, which is able to facilitate and help us as we, work out those ramifications for us. I think you could say the same sort of thing happens when the DI in Death in Paradise has their epiphany. Oh, this is how the murder was solved. Let's get everyone together. I've got good news of justice. And comfort, and we may not call it joy, but it's let's bring everyone together. Yeah. Here is what happened, and here are the ramifications of that. So, yeah.
It's a revelation of the truth.
Amen.
Which,
Hallelujah.
And particularly, which is particularly satisfying when you've had a crime that has been deliberately set up to cause confusion and to hide and divert attention from justice. I would argue that the particular setting we have in this episode of an impossible murder, but in a public setting where there's only a few people who could have done it, was not the most intelligent method. I think psychologically, I think you could say they maybe wanted to be caught because there's only a certain number of people who could have done it, whereas if it had been an impossible murder in his home or another location, it was deliberately, they wanted it to seem like someone from the outside had come in to commit the murder.
Yeah.
But there was Dwayne, police. Yeah, there was a police officer who was
he was on duty
outside, but they knew he was there. So at that point, if they were being clever, they should have decided not to go ahead with their plan and make a different plan. And anyway,
they did say it was hard to see this person, wasn't it? Which is why they decided to do it at the polling station.
But anyway, let's not get into analysing the methodology, but there is definitely something about it's satisfying to see the truth revealed, especially when the culprits, which we see particularly in this sort of Agatha Christie model, where it's supposed to be an impossible murder, where the culprit can't be found, and where it's really satisfying to then actually find out who did it, and for that truth to be known. Yeah. I do though want to talk about Epiphany versus denouement.
Oh, so, Ruthie, from your time in Paris, Ruthie, tell us what is denouement? What does that mean?
Well, I was about to say, here comes my regular question in the podcast of, Kate, what does that word mean?
Here's Kate's word of the day. Denouement is often used in literary criticism, particularly of mystery stories, where it's that moment in the narrative where everyone is gathered together and the solution is revealed. So it's that Agatha Christie moment where Poirot gathers all the suspects together in one room and talks through the sequence of events and then says, and the murderer is this person. So there's a method, there's it's not just simply revealing the murderer is you, it's actually explaining a process as well. So there is that, it is revelation of truth, sharing that revelation with a wider range of people and explaining it, which my question is, so the detective has their epiphany, they realise the truth and then they share the truth with the denouement. Do we as priests, is that our role? Do we have that role of explaining the truth to others? That was just one of my reflections.
See, I've got two thoughts going through my head. My first one, as you were speaking, was, to what extent is heaven or some kind of purgatory like a denouement at the end of a murder mystery, where we're all gathered together and, you know, to some extent, the truth is revealed and our sins are laid before us, but everything is going to be made just and fair in the love of God, kind of thing. And then you threw in the whole thing about us as priests doing denouement, and it's like, oh my goodness, is church... What does church look like if we're a murder mystery group? Or, well, not murder mystery people, but like in terms of doing denouement with people, in terms of, right, well, here is the truth, let's unpack it, let's talk it out all togetér. And I guess you get to a really interesting combination of things with that idea of denouement, because there's a pastoral element because you're dealing with people. There is a truth element in dealing with the teachings of Christian spirituality and what the scriptures have to say to us.
And there's hoping to lead people to their own epiphanies as well. I can't name specific examples, but I've definitely seen in shows where the detective, or I think even in Doctor Who, will look to their companion and they're kind of encouraging that person along the discovery process. Or maybe in Sherlock Holmes and that relationship between Watson and Sherlock.
Or in Legally Blonde, which is what I've just thought of in the revelation in the courtroom.
Yes.
Where Elle Woods has that epiphany of, but you got a perm and all this stuff, and then slowly kind of teases it out, and her sisters from the sorority, they get it before the rest of the courtroom because they understand per maintenance and understand why it would happen, and she teases out kind of, you know, forces this person to unravel their plot of how they couldn't have been in shower, because isn't it the correct perm process that you cannot get your hair wet for 48 hours at risk of deactivating the ammonium glycolate.
Amazing.
And that kind of
well done for remembering that.
Oh well, I used to have a perm, didn't I? So you know, I do know my perm maintenance. And it's I also thought as well, when you were talking about it, about like those two scenes popped into my head. First, Elle Woods, because you know, what a hero, who doesn't want to be like Elle Woods? But also just the I've not seen it apart from the courtroom scene of A Few Good Men, where I want the truth, you can't handle the truth. And I think there's something about mystery as part of this as well, that actually, you know, we reveal some of it, but we can't get it fully. And, you know, I'm supposed to reveal kind of the mystery of the incarnation and the mystery of the Trinity and all this stuff. And do you know what? There's bits of it I don't get. I can't handle the truth because my brain doesn't, I can't compute that. I am not God. I do not understand in that way. But yet we're supposed to tease out and try and understand.
I love that at the heart of the Eucharistic prayer, one of the phrases and responses we can have is, great is the mystery of faith. Christ has died, Christ is risen, Christ will come again. And that is a mystery that we are all embedded in, but it's something that we can lean upon as well, whilst the unravelling happens within our own lives. I quite like it's something I've got. Great is the murder mystery of faith, in terms of and Poirot was priest and all that kind of thing. Is that, so okay, no, here we go. Here's the book. Here's the book idea. Poirot as priest. Great is the murder mystery of faith.
Or even Poirot in the place of Jesus. Wait with me, because the role that Jesus has with his disciples in upholding the mystery of who he is, where he's quite reluctant to say, "I am the Son of God. I am the Word made flesh." Instead, he kind of teases it out of those
so that
around
they may
him.
use the little grey cells.
They will use the little grey cells. So it's definitely something. Mystery is a really important part of our faith, and the realization and revelation is not something that someone can tell us. It's something that we must experience, and we can be guided towards that realization, to that moment of epiphany, just as the Magi follow the star. Just as the shepherds follow the instructions of the angels, but it's up to us as individuals to then come to understand what this discovery means, and then go on to help others towards that understanding, in recognition that we cannot force that understanding.
But I do also think there's something about not understanding it all. So you just made me think, if Poirot's the priest, then Captain Hastings is the disciples in all of this. And, Captain Hastings doesn't get it, but trusts Poirot. And so kind of does things as part of that. And so I think there's part of that as well, is that I don't get it all. I get enough, but I don't get it all. But I trust the person who offers it.
Can I just give a shout out to Miss Marple as Mary, please?
Oh,
carry on.
Or we could also say Sherlock Holmes and John Watson, where Sherlock is very bad at explaining to Watson what is actually happening, but Watson trusts him and trusts that this will lead them to a progression of truth. Or the Doctor and whoever the companion is. Generally speaking, that relationship is that the Doctor understands what's going on, and whoever is running alongside them,
the human bumbles along,
has to trust that the Doctor will eventually reveal. And there is that kind of that bit of a recurring joke of "I'll explain later," and then the explaining doesn't necessarily always happen. But it's a really interesting dynamic which is present throughout loads of different media, actually, but also in our faith. And I think in the Christian faith, our understanding is that we won't truly know everything until we are fully reunited with God.
And that's why Death in Paradise is all about Christmas. Because doesn't Christmas stand in for that time when the truth shall be known? Amen.
Indeed. It is Christmas is a time when we celebrate the Word made flesh, and the Word is truth, and the truth lives among us.
I've loved this. This has been so much fun.
Yeah.
Thank you for humouring me.
Yeah.
Going on so many different things. So this is great.
We could continue on with this. I hope you've enjoyed our gradual realisation and epiphany during the course of this discussion. And as we draw things to a close, I'm feeling like maybe we've learnt a little bit more about the season of Epiphany, the season of Christmas, by watching Death in Paradise. Just a few things that you might like to think about. Firstly, do you have a favourite murder mystery show or book? We'd love to know. Ooh. Maybe we can watch that next.
Midsummer Murders.
And then next, also, in your journey of faith, have you had a moment of sudden realisation, an epiphany moment? Or have you had one of those denouement moments where you feel like someone has explained it to you, or that you've explained it to someone else, leading to revelation?
Let us know.
Let us know. And in the meantime, we wish you all a very joyful Epiphany.
Happy Epiphany, everybody.
We hope you've enjoyed this episode of the Vicars Watch Dibley. Thank you to Nat for editing our ramblings.
Any opinions expressed are our own and do not necessarily reflect the views of the Church of England or any other organisation with which we are affiliated.
If you like our podcast, leave us a review, follow us on social media and share it with your friends. And, as always, bless you for listening.
Oh.
You know, all this talk that we've had in this episode, it's made me realise, it's suddenly occurred to me, I've never had an epiphany.
Oh no! I fell for it.